Russia planned for this phase of the war to look different. By now, Western tanks were supposed to be gone from the battlefield, ground down by drones, broken by artillery, forced into irrelevance by sheer exposure. That assumption sat quietly inside Russian planning rooms as the war dragged on. And then, Leopard 2s kept showing up anyway, not in parade footage, not in dramatic breakthroughs designed for headlines. They appeared in places where wars don't resolve cleanly, where pressure builds instead of explodes, where units bend under stress rather than collapse outright. That's the part Russia didn't account for. Ukraine didn't use Leopard 2s as symbols, it used them as instruments. Once that choice was made, the problem stopped being whether Russia could destroy a tank. The real question became whether Russia could force Leopard crews to stop doing their job. So far, it hasn't, and that's why this isn't a story about a vehicle surviving the battlefield. It's a story about a strategy Russia still doesn't know how to dismantle. Because every Leopard that stays operational forces Russia to spend time it no longer has. Russian doctrine treats Western armor predictably. Locate it, fix it in place, apply layered fires, break it through attrition. The assumption is simple. Once a modern tank is damaged or isolated, it stops shaping the fight. Crews abandon it. Recovery fails. The battlefield claims another expensive machine. That logic worked often enough early in the war to feel reliable. What it didn't anticipate was how Ukraine would actually deploy Leopard 2s once the fighting became dense and unforgiving. Instead of pushing them forward as spearheads, Ukrainian commanders placed Leopards where failure would hurt Russia most, on threatened flanks, inside defensive fights where timing mattered more than territory, at moments where preventing collapse was more important than advancing a line on a map. That choice quietly changed the problem Russia was trying to solve, because stopping a breakthrough is one thing, stopping a tank designed to deny momentum is something else entirely. Pokrovsk wasn't meant to be dramatic. From Russia's perspective, it was a pressure operation. Tighten approaches, threaten supply routes, force Ukrainian units to pull back before isolation became unavoidable. The kind of slow squeeze that doesn't rely on spectacle, just inevitability. Leopard 2s entered that picture not to win the city, but to destroy the timetable. As Russian units attempted to close corridors, Leopard crews were positioned to hold critical ground just long enough to keep those corridors alive. Fire was deliberate. Movement was controlled. The tanks weren't charging forward. They were refusing to be displaced. That distinction matters. Russia didn't fail due to lack of firepower. It failed because it couldn't force a decisive moment. Every attempt to compress Ukrainian defenses ran into armor that could absorb pressure, reposition under threat, and continue fighting without collapsing the formation around it. Encirclement relies on inevitability. Leopard 2s denied that feeling, not by dominating the battlefield, but by poisoning Russian certainty at every step. At some point, Russian planners assumed damage would solve the problem. Hit the tank, force the crew out, convert battlefield contact into permanent removal. That assumption collapsed the moment footage emerged of a damaged Leopard 2A4, continuing to operate under fire while towing a disabled Ukrainian T-72 off the battlefield. This wasn't a pristine success story. The Leopard had taken hits. It wasn't untouched, it wasn't invulnerable, but it stayed operational, and that's what mattered. In Russian doctrine, damage is supposed to equal denial. What happened instead was the opposite. Firepower was expended without achieving removal. The tank remained, the crew survived, the battlefield didn't reset. It just continued. Every time that happens, the cost of stopping Leopard operations rises without delivering decisive results. That's not a tactical inconvenience, that's a structural problem. By this stage of the war, Russia knows how to hit Leopard 2s. What it still hasn't figured out is how to make them stop mattering, because Ukraine's approach doesn't require Leopards to survive forever. It only requires them to survive long enough to deny Russia clean outcomes. That difference reshapes the entire equation, and it leads directly to the next phase of the story. The moment Leopard 2s stopped being individual assets and became something far harder to counter. Russia expected expected the Leopard problem to fade. The logic was straightforward. As drones multiplied and artillery density increased, heavy armor would become easier to isolate and harder to justify. Tanks were supposed to shrink in relevance as the battlefield filled with sensors and precision fire. What happened instead went the other way. Leopard 2s became more dangerous as the war evolved. Ukraine stopped treating the Leopard as a standalone solution and started using it as a stabilizer inside a larger system. Drones shaped the fight first. Infantry maneuvered under protection. Artillery punished Russian reactions rather than leading every engagement. This wasn't brute force. It was sequencing. Once that sequencing locked in, Russian counters began arriving one step too late. In late 2025 and early 2026, Leopard 2s appeared alongside Ukrainian Marine and mechanized units in operations that looked nothing like early war armored pushes. These weren't tank-led charges into prepared defenses. Leopards moved briefly, deliberately, and with support already in place. Drones clarified movement. Infantry stayed close. Artillery waited for Russian reactions instead of announcing the attack. Russian defenses were forced into response mode almost immediately. When Leopard fire suppressed a position, drones adjusted. When Russian units shifted, artillery followed. When reserves moved, new angles closed faster than expected. The danger wasn't a single breakthrough. It was depth. Ukrainian units didn't just push through. They stayed long enough to force Russian commanders into early commitments without clarity on where the real threat would emerge next. That disruption mattered more than visible destruction. Russia possesses weapons capable of destroying Leopard 2s. That isn't the issue. The problem is that destroying a tank isn't the same as neutralizing a strategy built around it. Repeatedly, Leopard crews remained operational long enough to reposition, cover withdrawals, or stabilize defensive lines after taking hits that would have removed older platforms entirely. Each engagement forced Russia to spend resources without achieving decisive removal. Anti-tank systems were expended, artillery was redirected, drones were committed, Ukrainian formations stayed intact. That imbalance compounds over time, because Russia isn't fighting isolated tanks. It's fighting a system that refuses to collapse cleanly. There were moments where Leopard operations hit natural constraints. Near Pokrovsk, a Leopard ambushed a Russian convoy, inflicted damage, and disengaged after running low on ammunition. From a distance, that looks like a limitation. Up close, it reveals the strategy. The objective wasn't annihilation. It was interruption. Movement was disrupted. Timelines broke. Russian forces failed to continue as planned. The Leopard withdrew intact. The mission was already complete. That's the core of Ukraine's approach. Leopard 2s aren't used to fight until the last round. They're used to reshape engagements before Russia can stabilize them. By this stage, Russia isn't struggling to damage Leopard 2s, it's struggling to corner them. Every attempt to fix Ukrainian armor in place opens pressure somewhere else. Every focused effort to eliminate a Leopard creates gaps that matter more. Every assumed degradation is followed by the same tanks reappearing in roles that hurt Russian planning even more. This isn't coincidence. It's design, and it sets the stage for the most dangerous effect of all. By the time Russian commanders realized Leopard 2s weren't disappearing from the battlefield, the real damage had already moved somewhere harder to measure, inside their decision loops. This is where the strategy stops being about armor and starts becoming psychological. Russian planning depends on narrowing possibilities, identify the main effort, fix it in place, apply pressure until something gives. That model works when heavy assets behave predictably. Leopard 2s refuse to do that. Instead of anchoring Ukrainian units, they injected ambiguity into every phase of Russian planning. Each appearance raised the same unresolved question. Is this a defensive hold, a shaping action, a feint, or the opening move of something larger? Russian commanders had to answer quickly. They often answered wrong. When Leopard 2s appeared near Pokrovsk during encirclement pressure, they weren't announcing a counteroffensive. They were holding corridors open just long enough to deny collapse. Fire support landed exactly where Russian units expected weakness, not to reverse the situation outright, but to stretch timelines and force early commitment of reserves. That kind of intervention doesn't register as victory. It registers as denial, and denial corrodes planning faster than losses. Russia does have counters for heavy armor. The problem is that those counters assume armor behaves the way it used to. Drones punish tanks that linger. Artillery destroys formations that mass. Anti-tank teams thrive when movement is predictable. Leopard 2s were used in ways that denied all three clean opportunities at once. They moved only when the picture was clear. They fired when angles favored them. They disengaged before pressure converged. Then they reappeared elsewhere in roles that didn't resemble traditional tank warfare at all. That forced Russian units into a constant reactive posture. Commit drones too early and they're wasted. Hold artillery too long and the Leopard relocates before fire arrives. Push infantry forward and the tank is already shaping a different axis entirely. None of these responses are wrong on their own. They're just late. And late responses are worse than no response at all in a compressed battlefield. There's another layer to this that rarely gets discussed. Leopard 2s didn't just survive hits, they survived attention. Russian forces learned that even focused effort didn't guarantee removal. A damaged tank that kept operating, a crew that withdrew under fire, a platform that exited the fight intact after completing its task. Each outcome chipped away at confidence. Commanders hesitated before committing resources. Units questioned whether exposing drones, artillery, or infantry was worth the risk to eliminate a tank that might not even be the main problem. That hesitation created space. Ukraine exploited it ruthlessly. Leopard crews didn't need to destroy everything in front of them. They needed to stay alive long enough for Russia to doubt its own responses. Once doubt set in, tempo shifted. This is where credit belongs. Not to German engineering alone, but to Ukrainian crews using those tools with discipline and judgment under extreme pressure. This wasn't brute force, it was battlefield maturity. At this stage, the Leopard 2 strategy isn't about dramatic advances. It's about denying Russia clean outcomes. Encirclements that don't close fast enough. Advances that stall before consolidating. Convoys disrupted just long enough to derail a timetable. Defensive lines that hold longer than expected. Each delay forces Russia to burn resources for diminishing returns. Ukraine doesn't need Leopard 2s to win every fight. It needs them to make Russian success slow, expensive, and uncertain. That's exactly what they've done. Russia doesn't lack weapons capable of killing Leopard 2s. It lacks a way to neutralize what those tanks represent inside Ukraine's wider system. And that's the difference between countering a platform and countering a strategy. By now, the problem is clear. This isn't about whether Russia can destroy Leopard 2s. It's about whether Russia has any meaningful adjustments left to make. That question leads us to the end of the story, the moment where Russia runs out of options entirely. By this point, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Russia isn't losing because Leopard 2s are everywhere. It's losing because Leopard 2s appear exactly where Russian plans can't absorb them. That distinction matters. Russian doctrine adapts through mass. When something resists, pressure increases. More drones, more artillery, faster assaults. On paper, that should eventually overwhelm any armored system. Ukraine never presents one. Leopard 2s are used as decision-forcing tools inside a wider network. Drones shape the space first. Recon clarifies corridors. Electronic warfare narrows responses. Only then does the tank move, briefly and deliberately, with a clear exit already planned. By the time Russian fire arrives, the Leopard is gone. Every attempted counter lands after the moment that mattered, and warfare fought in arrears bleeds time. Normally, Russia adjusts behavior. Here, every adjustment closes one problem and opens another. Slow movement preserves vehicles, but gives Ukrainian defenses time to harden. Faster movement regains initiative, but exposes forces to precision fire. Concentrating assets to hunt Leopards creates gaps elsewhere that Ukraine exploits immediately. There is no stable configuration. Any posture Russia chooses either sacrifices momentum or survivability. That isn't a tactical issue, it's a structural trap, and traps don't get solved with better aim. There's one factor Russia cannot manufacture on demand: experience. Ukrainian Leopard crews are no longer adapting under fire. They're operating from it. They know when to press and when the mission is already complete. They understand how long exposure is tolerable and when disappearance is victory. That judgment doesn't come from manuals. It comes from surviving contact again and again. Russia can replace vehicles. It can rotate units. It can introduce new equipment. It cannot accelerate battlefield intuition. And that gap widens every time Leopard 2s complete a mission and leave Russian plans unresolved. So, when people ask whether Russia will eventually counter Ukraine's Leopard 2 strategy, they're framing the problem the wrong way. Counters assume symmetry. They assume time. They assume a stable battlefield where lessons learned today can be applied tomorrow. None of that exists anymore. What Ukraine has done with Leopard 2s isn't about perfect execution. It's about removing Russia's ability to recover momentum once it's lost. Every engagement doesn't just cost hardware. It costs planning confidence. It costs tempo. It costs the ability to predict what happens next. And those are losses that compound. Russian forces can adapt to weapons. They can adapt to tactics. They can even adapt to setbacks. What they cannot adapt to is a battlefield where success never arrives cleanly enough to build on, where every gain is provisional, where every push forward carries the risk of being stalled, redirected, or hollowed out before it matters. That's the quiet power of this strategy. Leopard 2s don't need to dominate the battlefield. They only need to exist at the right moment in the wrong place for Russian plans, long enough to delay, long enough to force a rethink, long enough to keep outcomes unresolved. Over time, unresolved outcomes become paralysis. This is why the story doesn't end with a dramatic collapse or a single decisive battle. It ends with something far less visible and far more damaging. A force that keeps moving, keeps fighting, keeps spending resources without ever regaining control of the situation it's trying to shape.